No, I saw this chair, but no, like.
my favorite.
And when is it?
ever. All right, we're going to call our finance meeting to order. We want to make sure that we have our virtual community in place, and we'll get started here. All right, we'll call our Finance Committee meeting to order. At this time, I just want to remind the committee that the opportunity for each member to disclose potential conflicts and beliefs that they can be unbiased and unable to participate, or that they elect to recuse themselves from this matter, is available at this time. If there's any conflicts of interest, we will allow the committee members to identify those at this time.
None that I'm aware of.
Seeing none, we will move on to approval of our March 25th minutes that we have been emailed and had an opportunity to review. I will solicit a motion for approval of those minutes.
I second.
All in favor, vote by the sign of aye. Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. The minutes are adopted. Next, for our informational purposes, we'll have our COVID ACS and State CARES Act update, and Bruce will give that to us at this time.
All right, just a couple of things. First of all, the pay differentials, or some people call it hazard pay differentials for staff, ceased April 2nd with the reduction in COVID impact at the hospital. So those pay differentials, the hourly pay differentials in nursing, respiratory, and some other areas of the hospital ceased on April 2nd, just as a heads up. We do still, as you guys know, we still have our COVID screeners in place. We're still limiting visitors, and those are under consideration as we go forward. We did not make a COVID ACS entry in the month of March, but we do have a fairly large entry to catch up in March and April that Jerry has just estimated, so that'll be reflected in the April financials. One other thing is alternate care site. I think everybody knows that it is being closed down. The state has actually removed their supplies, some equipment, and there were some beds, patient beds in there that they have taken off site. The nice thing is they will continue to pay the lease through May 31st. The state, TEMA, had agreed to leave the 8th floor improvements intact. So that's the nice part. You know, that was just a shelled space. It's now got floors and walls and bathrooms, and we can use it for other purposes going forward. A lot of times the feds require that they be deconstructed and put back in the same place, but I think the governor and the team of folks were able to convince them to leave it largely intact. Mark was involved in that, and that's nice, because that would have been a shame to tear $1 million, $2 million worth of improvements and just throw them into a dumpster. So we're appreciative of that. The last thing is State CARES Act. I know we talked about the federal COVID CARES Act. We were notified by THA, starting in January timeframe, that the hospital, we had enough positive COVID patients in the ICU, where more than 50% of the patients in our intensive care space were COVID positive, which made us eligible for reimbursement for some staffing costs through the state side of the CARES Act. And so in the month of March, we actually were reimbursed about $900,000. So you'll see it on the financials, but and then another $380,000 that we received in April, so a total of $1.29 million from the state for the CARES Act to reimburse us for costs, mostly in intensive care and contract labor, which were not eligible under the federal CARES Act. So I think the state designed it intentionally that way. We were one of many hospitals who were eligible. We have now exhausted our eligibility because we're not hitting those numbers anymore. But that was a very positive for the hospital.
Were we expecting any of those dollars, or was that, accounted for in budgeting, or is that?
It was never budgeted, because we didn't know about it at the time, so it was not budgeted. It is reflected in our actual financials for March, and it was a small bit in April. But, so basically reimbursed us for some very high costs in those months, so.
That's good.
And, there were 4 periods involved. They were, end of November into December and part of January, I think. 4 periods. They did 3-week periods with the state that we were eligible for based on our ICU utilization, COVID. And so up to $259,000 for each one of those periods, which we thankfully were able to access. We did have to apply, and we did have to submit all the cleared checks and all the expenses to the state in order to get those funds. So we've been fully reimbursed now. And
That's awesome.
tribute to the finance team and Veronica's team, because we stayed after it. It took quite a bit to get all that together in a short period of time.
How far back did the State CARES Act look? Were those the only 3
That was,
3-week periods where we had enough
No,
COVID patients over the
correct.
past
That,
year?
for us,
Okay.
there were definitely other hospitals that were part of it well before we got there, but it was because of the number of beds. We were one of the smaller hospitals to be eligible, and we only qualified by our ICU. We didn't have high enough COVID as a percentage of patients in the rest of the hospital, but the ICU in particular, we did, and that's where we qualified.
And we didn't qualify any other months in 2020? That's kind of good news, bad news. Right?
Good news, bad news, right. And it was, you know, for Vanderbilt, $259,000 in a period is rounding. For us, it's significant.
Right.
So we benefited from it significantly. So it's a good news, bad news. We took care of those patients and endured those costs, but we found at least a reimbursement mechanism for at least roughly 10 to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
It was positive. So that's it for COVID, ACS, and state CARES.
So let's roll right into some good news on the budget.
All right, and the good news on the budget, first of all, Dr. Webb and I presented to the mayor March 31st. I thought it went really well, good questions. Kristen Wilson was there, the mayor came in briefly, and obviously the finance team was involved in those meetings as well. I thought it went pretty well, as they sounded supportive, but they've sounded supportive sometimes in the past, different administrations, and then we got this bad number. And I think most of you, if you've read social media today, you've probably heard we requested a subsidy of 49.5, and in the paper or in the news today, and the mayor certainly confirmed that his request is to fully fund the hospital at the $49 million threshold, which is really great news. So that's all positive. I don't know
That's
if
the good
this
news I want.
finance committee or this board would, send something affirming and thanking the mayor and the administration for support, but it might be something to consider.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing on the budget. We'll go into our financial statements, which does need approval from the finance committee. Mr. Naramore, you're recognized for
All right.
our March 2021 financial statement.
All right. So you should have financials in front of you. Our inpatient admissions volume was up definitely in the month of March, from 160 admissions to 197 admissions. Still a little bit below budget, but significantly better than prior month. Our observation admits also increased, still below budget, but significantly higher than our prior month. And total patient days were below budget, but above prior month at 850. Our length of stay finally is starting to drop. You know, some of that's the acuity of the patient. But we have been 5.7 days 2 months ago. We were at 5 or 4.9 last month. It dropped to 4.3 this month. That's a positive for the hospital. We're moving patients through a little more quickly. Our emergency visits are still low, even though it was 1,500 in February with the whiteout week, and then just below 2,000 this month, still about 24% below budget. They still have not returned to sort of pre-COVID levels. Clinic visits were way up. I think we had 2,300 visits last month. We had almost 4,000, and I'm not even counting the vaccine clinic, which was another 430 clinic visits that Dorothy's team took care of. So well over 4,400 visits in the clinics in the month of March. That's great, future state for us. In the surgery space, inpatient surgery volumes are still depressed, 28 this month, a little better than last month, but well below budget. Outpatient rose up to about 90, it was 98 this month, close to budget, well above last month's numbers. And then our cath lab is busy and staying pretty busy, 72 cases compared to a budget of just 22. OB deliveries rebounded to 33 from 24 last month. And case mix dropped off, a little bit from 1.66 to 1.53. That's, contributes to part of the reason why our length of stay improved a little bit for the month. So those are sort of the basic stats for the month. And if you want to look at the income statement, just a few things. Our patient revenues actually exceeded budget. I think this is the first time probably since COVID that our patient revenues, gross revenues exceeded budget just slightly by 2%. Our net revenue exceeded budget by about 5% at $4.3 million. Our cash collections, which Christine can talk about in a minute, we've been running, I think we did 5.4 million in February collections and 4.7 in March, and we're real close to hitting 5 million for this month that we're in right now. Those are extraordinarily strong cash collection numbers for the hospital. So those are great positives for us. Other revenues, the one I talked about, that sort of jump off the page for us is the other revenues of 1.5 million, that's $1,260,000 better than budget. 930,000 of that is the state CARES Act reimbursement that we talked about earlier. We do have another 300,000+ coming that'll be reflected into April. It was received in April. So all in, we had $10.5 million of net revenues to work with, which is $1.5 million higher than our budget. And we probably needed it because our expenses were very close to $1.5 million, actually 1.6 million higher than budget. Some of the budget, the salary expenses are higher. There were quite a few clinic providers, clinics that we did not have in the original budget. We were successful recruiting physicians in to orthopedics and some other areas of the hospital. High costs, and eventually we'll get those revenues. But that's the providers, the clinics are driving most of the salary versus budget. So it's not anything unusual. We know what they are. We just had not budgeted for those clinics way back when we put this budget together. The other is contract labor. It is still hitting us very hard. It was over $600,000 this month, and it's pretty broad throughout nursing. One of our med-surg floors, ICU, is in a little better place, and then our perioperative areas are pretty high in terms of contract labor. And those contract labor rates, the hourly rates, they're starting to decline, but they were still $86 for med-surg and $120 for critical care per hour. So that's what the March numbers reflect. They've started to decline in April, so we expect those numbers to start to decline. We do have quite a few new grads starting in July. I'm looking at Veronica, I think July. And that'll help in some of the floors and so forth, not so much in the critical care areas, but we've just got to get some staff nurses back. Nurses are returning to Tennessee that were on these travel assignments, so it's getting better. And I know Veronica has big plans, and Diana has big plans that we're going to start getting recruits back in here and hanging on to them so we can do something about that contract labor number. Let's see. So overall, I'll just say the other expenses on here, the only other expenses that are significant, is the security contract that we inherited this year. That was unbudgeted. It's about $900,000 a year. It is budgeted in our 2022 budget, and thankfully, the mayor's administration showed support. So at least we can cover up that bogey going forward. So, margin for the month was a negative $98,000 compared to a positive of $27,000 in the budget. And then year to date, if you go across, you can see we're at about $1.3 million loss for the fiscal year. Last year at the same time, we're at about a $4.8 million loss for the fiscal year. So improvement, not where we'd like to be, but improvement overall. So those are the financials for the month. I would just point out on the balance sheet, you can see that we have $1.4 million remaining of the restricted CARES Act grant. And we didn't hit it this month, but we will be hitting it in April, so that number will come down. We do expect that we'll fully deplete that fund before the fiscal year ends June 30th. The only other positive I'll say is our days in accounts payable, which I know were a news story for some reason recently. They're back down to close to 60 days. I think we have maybe one or two significant accounts that's out there beyond 60 days, but we've made a big dent in that. And with support, I'll say, from the finance department and the mayor, because they're allowing us to draw the subsidy in time to make sure that we take care of our vendors, which we appreciate. So that's the month of March, Mr. Chairman.
I have one question. Where did you say the security cost was located in
Oh, it's in our contract services.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good.
Yeah. And we just inherited it. It used to be paid out of the sheriff's office. The same group is working here, but now that comes out of our direct budget instead of the sheriff's budget.
Good. Good month.
It was a good one.
I don't have any questions. Motion for approval?
I second. All in favor, vote by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. The finance report is adopted by the committee. And let's see here.
Got a good revenue tax report for you.
Let's get it. Let's do that now.
All right. Ms. Crowley?
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Cash. There we go. And you can see that the red line is our goal that, we're in a part to get cash based on our net revenue. So we've been at it or over it for 12 months straight. And some of the ups and downs are really not related to the number of banking days a month that you would think. It's more related to really high dollar accounts that we've had periodically to this COVID cycle here. So we're finishing up real strong here this last month and showing a positive trend. On the unbilled, this is our goal line here, and this is our stretch goal. We really push to do even better. As you can see, for 2 months, we've been at or under that stretch goal. We can hold that 2 more months. We're going to push it down again. We're a little higher than what the industry is because we hold our accounts longer for various reasons. One of them is our IT systems are not as robust as others. We have very integrated systems for charging. So we do hope to push this down another day come July and to eventually lower our hold days, which would give us a whole day of receivables in advance there. So the whole team and HIM is doing a great job at working with departments and working with our physicians and all others to make that happen. And our new denials, this is not a good trend, as we all know. We're going up, and in the industry, I've got some industry data that it's going up industry-wide as well, which means that we're going to have to be extra cautious to avoid that in the future. And I was looking at the American Hospital Association did a survey recently, and it said hospitals have experienced a 23% increase in claim denials over the last 4 months, last 4 years. And 89% of the hospital leaders say that the increase in payment denials over the last 3 years have been significant. The denials cannot be recovered according to the AHA. So very important that we, be preventative upfront and bring that back down to our goals and our stretch goals. We do have a reduction in our authorizations. Usually our denials, number one, are related to not getting off so they're inaccurate or not complete. And that was only 18% of past months. However, 40% were related to medical necessity and some of that peer-to-peer as well as statusing inpatient versus outpatient. And we have a department working on those as a top priority. And our accounts receivable over 90 days, you can see our goal and our stretch goal, and we've been maintaining that pretty well. We do have two payers that are related to the increase recently, that is Centene, and mostly with Centene is related to high dollar accounts. And Anthem went up, 233,000 in aging just for Anthem alone, but that was one account, which is all but about, so you can see the high dollar accounts that we've experienced the last few months, creating some real ups and downs in all the numbers that we report. And on the last one shows our professional billing, and we have real good collections, 24.6. It should be good because the prior 2 months were pretty bad. We do have aging that's increasing there. We are doing a lot of catch up in coding and billing, and it's a good problem to have because we have had more business than we've been able to keep up with on the coding side. So we'll have to do some extra work and overtime in those areas to push that through. So that should result in a very good collection month coming months as well. And denied claims, we remain low there at 0.4%, well below industry average. Any questions?
No, at this time for me, thank you.
Thank you. Our last, agenda items is to, review if there's any contracts that we need to, review or look at today.
We do not have any contracts tonight for the finance.
Thank you. Well, at this time, I'll, motion to adjourn.
5 seconds.
All in favor, vote by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Aye. So we'll adjourn our finance meeting, and we will prepare for our full meeting in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
We even got done early, so.
And you got food in there.
Enjoy your